Great. So thank you so much to everyone.
Oh, no, I don't want to mute off. I have to.
Holly, you're muted.
That must have happened when I muted everybody.
everybody.
Okay, I'll start over. Thank you for letting me know. Great. So, hi, my name is Holly Rosenfink, everybody. I'm from the Westchester Jewish Coalition for Immigration. And it's great to see you. It's great to see so many familiar faces tonight. I'd love for you to put your name and your congregation or the organization that you're with in the chat box so we can all get to know each other. As we prepare for the new year and draw closer to God before the high holidays, during the period of Elul, we can use this time to rededicate ourselves to serving displaced persons through dedicated social actions and learning what is going on in the immigration space, both here and abroad. All of us at WJCI hope that tonight will inspire you and move you to take action. We'd like to thank several legislators and community leaders for either being here tonight or sending their regards, including aides from the offices of Congressman Mondier Jones, Congressman Jamal Bowman, State Senator Andrea Cousins, Westchester County Board of Legislator Catherine Parker, State Senator Shelley Mayer, Supervisor Jane Elkind-Eny, Steve Otis from the New York State Assembly, Portchester and organization, the Portchester Immigrant Defense Fund, Westchester Jewish Council, Ellen is Light, and SCRIC. And with that, I'd like to pass the torch to Howard Horowitz from the WJCI board. Thank you.
Thank you, Holly. Good evening, everyone. It is a privilege to work with WJCI and connecting us in solidarity with all of you and with the organizations that are represented with us this evening. We're going to leave our entire hour for our speakers and panelists, so I will not say much except to say that we are all focused on vital immigration issues that require our immediate and focused attention, and that's local, national, and global issues. And here to kick off our evening is, and it's my great honor to introduce Ruth Messinger, who will no doubt provide in her keynote a global view of the world of human rights, refugees, displaced people, and that global perspective. I think most of us, I will not dwell long on her bio. I could. It's long. She needs no introduction, but deserves a long one. But the short one is, many of us go back and know her as a wonderful, progressive politician. Spent 20 years in public service. She was a city councilwoman. She served as Manhattan Borough President. And of great relevance today, I would say, she is credited with a valiant attempt to unseat Mayor Rudy Giuliani way back when. Most important for us today is Ruth's background as also 2 decades, 18 years as CEO of the American Jewish World Service. She is now emeritus, a global ambassador for American Jewish World Service, but I think worth taking 10 seconds to tell you about her lifelong effort to focus the Jewish community's attention on the oppressed and persecuted communities, vulnerable communities worldwide. She headed campaigns to end the Darfur genocide, against child marriage in India, and importantly and ongoingly, to oppose violence against women and the LGBT community worldwide. Her ambassadorship has recently taken her to Rwanda, from which she's joining us, not from there, but she's returned, and now is joining us this evening. It's my great honor to welcome Ruth Messinger to the Zoom window.
Thank you very much, Howard. I have to say that when you, in that overly long introduction, you said I was a progressive. I thought you said I was aggressive. which is true. So I thought I would mention that part of the theme of this evening is to urge people who are listening, some of whom I know, and some of whom I know are very involved in this issue already, to take it on aggressively because there are such big problems and there's so much to do. You'll have a chance to hear from various panelists and to pose questions. I have the honor and challenge of trying to present some degree of an overview, but let me start first with a parable. There are 23 men, women, and children. They're on a journey of escape from oppression. They're thrown off of one boat, but they find another one. The captain says he will take them on, but only if they turn over all their possessions and a substantial amount of money. They do that. The captain takes them on and then brings them to a new shoreline. But remember, they are broke, they are homeless, and the few possessions that they have, the captain sells to get himself some money. So there they are with nothing, and they do not receive a good welcome. The local leaders do not want to admit them. Who are these refugees? They're not, in this case, anyone fleeing across the Mediterranean from Syria or Libya. They're not the current population of Afghanistan trying desperately to seek refuge here, and they're not the people now at our southern border. No, these are people who were traveling from Recife, Brazil, to what turned out to be the tiny Dutch outpost of New Amsterdam on Manhattan Island. The governor there, Peter Stuyvesant, wrote his bosses back in Amsterdam these words, and I quote, "The Jews have arrived with their customary usury and deceitful trading. Owing to their present indigence, they might become a charge in the coming winter." So, end of parable. Those refugees were our ancestors on these American shores. And they stayed here only because Peter Stuyvesant's plea was rejected by the Dutch East India Company. I hope that puts you in mind of what it is I want to talk about. The essence of my message is we are all immigrants. And increasingly in our Jewish community, people know their immigrant stories only in different degrees. Some know their country of origin. Some know why they came to this country and how, why their ancestors came to this country and how, and some do not. So I put you in mind of the line from our Seder service, "My father was a wandering Aramaean." And I tell you more to the point that my paternal grandfather boarded a boat in Switzerland and came on his own, probably undocumented, at the age of 16. And my other grandparents came to this country and made their way here from Germany and Romania at a time also when immigrants were not necessarily welcome. I think it's a tragedy and a challenge for all of us that some of these immigrant stories are fading in many families, leading to generations in our own community who think of themselves and their families as so rooted in the US that they don't have an immigrant past. But that's not true. They may be here today, but they were not here all along. And the fact that many of them, in fact, I'm going to say so many of them, are talking about the people on our borders as invaders, as the other, as a threat and somehow to our way of life, that people are ignoring the plight of asylum seekers, ignoring the stories of people who were stranded in the Afghanistan airport because we did not plan properly for our departure. These are people that I hope you will not only bring to mind, but that you will understand have a direct connection, at least in my mind and in my heart, to many of our ancestors. Let me take a few minutes to trace some facts that some of you may be well aware of, but probably not in the minds of all of you. American history has been decidedly mixed about the notion of accepting immigrants, but it has never been as glorious as we sometimes like to pretend. Going back to 1790, we defined citizens, as you probably all know, as free white persons. Only property men in that group were allowed to vote. And since then, there have been 250 years of restrictions being loosened and tightened, both as to who was a citizen and who could vote, and more importantly, from our point of view tonight, as to who could come into the United States. There's a huge history here of waves of immigrants coming in, waves of new settlement, and I must note, equally, waves of xenophobia, explosions against these new immigrants. Just as an example, not much cited in most histories, in 1909, there were Greeks who escaped from oppression in Greece and settled in various cities in the Midwest. And an effort was organized by an Irishman who had probably been here about 2 minutes earlier than the Greeks to rid the city of the Greeks because they do not mix. An important moment in history here is in 1924. You can look this up. This is complicated history, but our government, our United States government, reacted to pressures from people with roots in Northwestern Europe and Scandinavia, as those people objected to new immigrants coming from Southern and Eastern Europe, saw them as inferior races, and then objected to Jews coming into the country because their religion was different. The laws that were passed in 1924 in response to those anti-immigrant pressures were the laws that were used to keep out Jews 15 years later when we were trying to escape the Holocaust. So that's a long history in about 3 minutes. Let me bring us up to today. Getting there, let me just note that in 1938, 67% of Americans opposed additional refugees. Most of you know the story of the St. Louis, which, as I said, was refused entry under the laws from 1924. I want to note that Eleanor Roosevelt's biggest regret in her career, she said this when she was alive, was her failure to change FDR's mind on allowing the St. Louis to dock. So where are we today? You can choose your number, friends. The United Nations says that there are 270 million immigrants and refugees worldwide, that hundreds of thousands of them are children, that in some cases, as we know, particularly on our southern border, we have recent history of children being separated from their parents, of people being denied their basic individual human rights. Severe damage is obviously done to those children, but trauma is done as well to those adults trying to enter this country, having been told this is the place to come, this is the place to be, only to find that they are not welcome. I would bring you as a kind of side note, up to date, I recently solicited some help from the Manhattan Borough President in urging people to support the wonderful volunteer efforts at the Port Authority, where we are welcoming immigrants, largely asylum seekers, largely from Venezuela. Borough President Levine posted a really affirmative note on social media, and almost the entire response to that note was people saying, don't let them in, we have enough of our own problems. So obviously that's not a representative sample, but it was nevertheless distressing to read. So we have a complicated situation today. We have the continuing problem of Afghans, and by the way, just a small note, folks, they are Afghans or Afghanistan citizens. They are not, which is what all Americans call them, including most members of Congress, Afghanis, which is the name of the currency. So we all have always grammatical lessons to learn as well. But many problems with Afghanistan representatives who are still trying to get here. Some wonderful stories, which I'm sure you'll hear with and from the panel and from some of the audience, about individual families being welcomed, but the overall problem is not yet solved. And again, we are hearing people describe immigrants as invaders, portraying them as a threat to our way of life, stating that they are lying to get into the United States. The press that has been at Port Authority has been desperate to get stories, this particularly, I'm sorry to say, the New York Post, proving that these people do not really deserve asylum. So it's been necessary to bar people from talking to the press. I want to note that many of the immigrants coming into this country or seeking to come into this country or specifically seeking asylum are leaving situations of extreme danger, of oppression in their own countries, And what is not so commonly known, but I want to bring it to your attention, they're leaving because of loss of land. That means theft of their land, usually by multinational corporations. And they are leaving because of the growing incapacity due to climate change of them being able to stay where they are. So in parts of the world that we only read about occasionally, there are such severe levels of drought or flooding that people who made a living off the land for years have now become what the UN is calling climate refugees. And you are all smart enough to figure out that that group of people, climate refugees, is only going to grow. So now I want to make a couple of points that I hope will be relevant to the panelists that we're going to hear from, who have many ideas about what each of us can do. I want to make a distinction that I make pretty often between service and advocacy. I want to praise all of those people who are delivering clothing to Port Authority, who are coming down at 6 in the morning to volunteer. I want to sing the praises of the TLC NYC group, which is organizing those volunteers. It's just extraordinary. And I want to remind you that going to Port Authority or helping a family is different from being willing to engage in a serious long-term policy debate about changing what we do as a country. Both of the efforts, both service efforts and advocacy efforts, are critical. Next, I want to make a pretty obvious point, but you all need to know this because I'm hoping you're getting into debates with people over your Rosh Hashanah dinner. None of this is about open borders. That is what the people who oppose these efforts say. This is simply about setting a rational immigration policy. It's about recognizing the existence and the need for, in this world, a sophisticated asylum process. And those are the efforts that we should be discussing with political leaders, economists, business leaders, and other Western countries. Otherwise, we end up with a policy that is not so different from the policy that turned away the St. Louis. The idea of taking only a few people, of thinking that maybe we need to get rid of those we have, of believing that it's okay to deport people, and of pushing the legal numbers towards zero. There is much too strong an effort in that direction from friends of ours and from legislators. And I'm hoping that the people who are on this call and the wonderful organizations that you represent will stand against that. So what are the things to do? Well, you're going to hear some of that from the panel. I'm going to steal a line from the HIAS representative because I think that HIAS has the most brilliant slogan of any not-for-profit organization in the world, and I ran one. But HIAS, as you know, says we used to help refugees because they were Jews, and now we help them because we are Jews. So you can process that in your head for a little while, and you can talk about it. There are demonstrations and activism and amazing initiatives at the border. There is serious work going on at Port Authority. But what I want to really leave you with is the thought that we have to act because we know the story and the consequences. We know the importance of creating free places for people to come with laws and regulations about asylum seeking with a reasonable, which we do not have now, number. We know the importance of interceding to help individual families, but this is about changing policy. And so before the panelists each speak to their work, I want to say two other things. One is, under the constraints of the invitation for how long I was able to talk, I short-circuited a lot of the history, but I urge you to immerse yourself in a little bit of the history of the number of times and ways in which our country, which talks about inviting people to enjoy freedom and democracy, constantly restricted the numbers of people who could come in, including, as I indicated very clearly at some points, the numbers of Jews. And then I want to leave you with one activity in which you can all engage, which will not come up from the rest of the panelists, and that is know your family's immigrant history, research it if you need to, know when people came in, go find the ship manifest, find the papers that authorized the first of your grandparents or great-grandparents to become citizens, and put them on your Seder plate. Yes, you all have added oranges and tomatoes and olives for all kinds of symbolic reasons. But given the theme of Passover, given the notion of our ancestors as wandering Aramaeans, and the reality, again, that each of us has an immigrant history, I urge you to find those papers, find those ship manifests, find those citizenship authorizations of some ancestor in your family, put them on the Seder plate and talk about them to your children and your grandchildren and your great-grandchildren. Thank you very much. That's it. I'm around to answer
Thank you.
questions and engage with the
Thank you,
panel.
Ruth. Thank you, Ruth. We're nothing but inspired. We could call your talk a definition of what it means to what the word empathy means. That it's not about them, it's about us. And hopefully that inspires all of our work and action at the national and local level. And we have with us tonight a distinguished panel. I'm going to read you their names and titles and then leave it to them to introduce yourself. And this panel is about people on the ground taking care of refugees, asylum seekers, changing policy, working on that policy, and getting us to hopefully a better place. Joining us for this panel is Rebecca Kersner, and hopefully they'll start to appear in front of us as the panel. If while I'm speaking, then if not afterwards. Rebecca is the Senior Director of Grassroots Advocacy and Organizing at HIAS. Also, welcome to the Zoom window, Carola Otero Bracco. She's the Executive Director and CEO of Neighbors Link. Let's welcome also Gerondi Martinez, Executive Director of the Community Resource Center in Mamaroneck, New York. And last but certainly not least, Yaritza Mendez, Co-Director of Organizing for Make the Road New York. Welcome, my panelists, and we will dive right in. And I think just hearing about you and what your organization does is important information and communication to our audience. Again, reminding everyone that we're here at a Westchester Solidarity meeting, first and foremost to understand what each of us does, and then taking away from it what we can do together to make change in the world. So if I could ask Gerondi to start us off and tell us about CRC and yourself and the work that you do in this area.
Of course. Thank you so much. Good evening. I'm Gerondi Martinez with the Community Resource Center, and I would like to thank the Westchester Jewish Coalition for Immigration for having us this evening, and to Ruth for the powerful aligning and helping us remember why we're here. My parents came to the US from Colombia in the late 80s and were able to naturalize in the mid 90s. I am first generation in this country, and I grew up in Mamaroneck, where CRC is located. I've been with the center for 15 years, and our mission is to empower and advocate for immigrant and low-income families in Westchester County. And we really focus on Southern Westchester County, and I'm so happy to have my colleagues here because we work so closely together across such a wonderful, huge county. And along with workforce development and educational programs, and of course, advocacy, which is so critical to the work we do, Community Resource Center is a strong case management and legal service department, and that's dedicated to supporting immigrants and asylum seekers. We provide critical links to resources like food and clothing, help parents enroll their children in school, seek counseling if anyone's in need, and connect families to legal support. And recently, we've had a lot of families asking for support with housing because of the high housing cost crisis in this county. And so our case managers have also been dedicated to supporting housing needs.
Thank you, Gerondi. And Carola, if you could introduce yourself to our audience and the work of your organization.
Sure, thank you. Hi, everybody. I'm Carola Otero Bracco. I'm the Executive Director of Neighbors Link. And I do want to just thank Holly Rosenfink for her work at WJCI and for inspiring us all the time. And I also just want to point out that Durandi, who just spoke, was recently awarded Crane's Notable Hispanic Leaders. And so we're very proud of one of our own who got this really incredible honor. So I just wanted to point that out. So at Neighbors Link, we offer a variety of programs that help the immigrant community integrate. The mission of our organization is to strengthen the whole community through the healthy integration of immigrants. And we believe that that is best served by providing services to the immigrant community that include ESL education, parent education, workforce education, immigration legal services. But we also provide a variety of programs for those that we call longer-term residents, because we believe that the only way to really integrate any community members is to work with the whole community. So we do expend significant resources in helping those that, as I said, that we call longer-term residents to understand the immigrant experience and why immigrants come to this country. I do want to mention that we have an immigration legal practice as well that has 7 immigration attorneys, about 5 paralegals, and this year we handled about 1,000 cases. So a pretty significant and growing practice that allows us to develop a real strong understanding of immigration legal issues. Just to give you a sense of the kinds of things that we've been working on most recently, I mentioned our work in cultural awareness training. We train about 400 police officers a year in cultural awareness training. We also train school teachers, superintendents, elected officials, talking as we discuss issues related to stereotyping and how that can limit our work. We've done about 114 community education sessions that were attended by about 15,000 people. Also, I'm proud to say that we're the proud sponsor of Reset Westchester, which is working to help refugees resettle into the area. And so we're proud to be doing that work, and primarily refugees from Afghanistan and the Ukraine. During the pandemic, we were very successful in getting over 93% of our clients vaccinated very early on. So real important work that we did during a time when it was very difficult to get vaccinated and people were very fearful of the vaccine. And during the pandemic, we also distributed close to $5 million to families to help them during very difficult economic times. And the last thing I'll mention is that we're also part of a group of organizations called Alianza Laboral, and we partner, Durandi and her organization, Community Resource Center, is part of that. And the other organizations include United Community Center of New Rochelle, Don Bosco Center, Catholic Charities, Worker Justice Center. I think I've got all of us in that list. I don't think I forgot anyone. And we coordinate and work together on a whole variety of issues, including the current work we're doing, helping new asylum seekers in the community and organizing a response to that. So with that, I'll stop and thank you so much for having me.
Well, thank you, Carola. I see there's some links being posted in the chat. Yuritsa has posted links to the organization. I'd encourage our panelists to do the same, and we will provide links to all of you in the audience in a follow-up email from this session. And now if I could ask Yuritsa Mendez to introduce herself and her work and her organization to all of us.
Awesome. Hi, everybody. Good evening. Pleasure to be here with you all. My name is Yuritsa Mendez, co-director of organizing at Make There New York. And just want to give a shout out to Ruth. A lot of your words really resembled with me and the work that, the reason why I do the work that I do. So a little bit about me before I talked about Make There New York. I was born and raised in the Dominican Republic, so migrated to the United States at the age of 10 years old. Because of the immigration system, my mom had to stay behind, and so my dad My brother, my younger brother, was still my younger brother, but at the time was 6 years old, and myself, that I was 10, had to migrate to the United States, essentially having to learn a new language, a new society, new culture, but more than anything had to be the mom, the wife, the sister, assume a role at a very early age, just to be able to help my dad acclimate to a new culture too, and just having him kind of like try to understand and navigate a very complex system in New York City. And I met Make There in New York at the age of 14. So 4 years later, I was still in high school, went to International High School, LaGuardia Community College, and was able to connect with Make the Road. At that time, we were doing work on in-state and out-of-state tuition. And then shortly after, doing work on DREAM Act and calling for comprehensive immigration reform. So immigration is very ingrained in my life. And I still do this kind of work because I want to make sure that, we're talking a lot about, new migrants or asylum seekers, but as someone who had the great privilege of being able to migrate to the United States with a residency, it was still very hard for my dad to just be able to acclimate to this new country. So to pivot to Make the Road, I want to share with you all the poem that kind of like inspired our current name of Make the Road New York. And it actually comes from a poet, Antonio Machado. And the kind of like the line that comes out of it, it says in Spanish, caminante no hay camino, se hace camino al andar. Or searchers, there is no road, we make the road by walking. And so that really inspired our name. Apologies, that's my daughter who's trying to, okay, no school tomorrow, who doesn't want to go to school tomorrow. But Make There in New York builds the power of immigrant and working class communities to achieve dignity and justice. And the way for us to do that is based out of four pillars within our model. The first one is to make sure that we're providing legal and survival services as we're thinking about tackling discrimination, abuse, and poverty. The second one is really thinking about transformative education to ensure that we're developing community members' abilities to lead our organization, our movement, and our society. The third pillar is about community organizing. We want to make sure that we're transforming the systems and the power structures that are impacting our communities. And last but not least, doing policy innovation to rewrite unjust rules and make our democracy truly accountable for all of us. And I know that we will have time later today to go into the weeds about the ins and the outs of some of the day-to-day work that we've been doing as an organization. So with that, I'll stop and pass it back to you, Howard.
Well, thank you. It's a question for you and for Carola before we move on to Rebecca. Yuritsa, is Make the Road New York in Westchester County, where it operates out of? Is that its focus?
Yeah, thank you for that question. We recently got a new office. So we're based out of White Plains. Our new office is in White Plains, and we have 4 other community centers in Brooklyn, Queens, Staten Island, and Long Island. So that information can also be found in our website for the exact address, but I'm more than happy to also drop it on the chat for you all.
Carola, where is Neighbors Link headquartered?
Sure, we have 3 centers. One is in Mount Kisco, one is in Ossining, and our newest center is in Yonkers. So we're located in
very Westchester focused. Just to keep all of us focused, that this is about thinking globally, acting locally, and that's what we're here about this evening. Rebecca, last but certainly not least, and I just second what Ruth said about HIAS. So the floor is yours.
Thanks so much. It's such an honor to be here, and especially in the company of all of these wonderful organizations and speakers. So thank you so much. HIAS is the world's oldest refugee organization. And we are based in the Jewish community, as a few of the other speakers have referenced. What we do is we provide on-the-ground support to refugees in more than 90 cities in 17 countries, including in the United States. Some of the examples of that work, we are in 10 cities along the US-Mexico border on the Mexico side, providing aid to refugees who are seeking to cross into the United States. We are in 13 refugee camps in Chad, serving the survivors of the Darfur genocide. We are on the island of Lesbos, Greece, where we're assisting refugees arriving by boat across the Mediterranean. We're in Ukraine and several surrounding countries, and we're in 9 countries in Latin America and the Caribbean supporting displaced Venezuelans and others. So that's just some examples of some of the places where we're located. We're also a refugee resettlement agency in the United States where we resettle in 27 cities. And that includes in Westchester, New York, where we work with a lot of the groups that are here on the call to resettle refugees in your local area. But I'm actually in Philadelphia. So thanks for having me from such a great distance away. My role is on the Jewish community engagement team. And I work to engage the Jewish community in being part of all that, being part of that response. And I'm so proud of the ways in which our community has stepped up and does step up to welcome refugees through advocacy, through our new program, which is called Welcome Circles. It's a pilot program on private resettlement of refugees, and we've got lots of groups forming them in Westchester County, working with Holly to do that, through protesting for the rights of asylum seekers and so many other ways. I'm really proud of the ways that the Jewish community has stood up. And I want to say that for the Jewish community, which a lot of us on the call are part of, we are a couple of days away from the biggest calendar moment in terms of the Jewish holiday season, which is Rosh Hashanah. And it's a time when we do an accounting of our souls, right? And a cheshbon hanefesh, an accounting of really a deep soul search. And so I want to say that it is a moment, I think, for us to really do a cheshbon hanefesh about our immigration system. Because it's been a busy year for sure, but it is really not enough that we all rallied to welcome Afghans when our government left so many people with no pathway out of the country. And it's really not enough that we advocated for funding so that, our government could provide funding so that Ukrainians could pass safely to Poland, crossing that border when almost no asylum seekers can cross our own border seeking safety in this country, when nobody is more human than anyone else. It is not enough that, to be as busy as we are and to see so many people still denied their human rights. So as Ruth said, our country has the capacity to have a refugee resettlement program that is responsive to the global need, and an immigration and asylum system that is fair and rational. And I'll add to that, not cruel and not, and not harmful and is even compassionate and welcoming. So I'm really glad to be here with all of you who agree with that and to figure out how we all move forward together. And I want to thank in particular Holly and WJCI and Marty and Howard, because you guys are just the greatest partners. And so I'm so glad to be here and to be in this work with you.
Well, thank you very much. And to continue this conversation, and now to sort of switch gears suddenly on you, and in the interest of time, make sure we cover it. I'd love to get each of your perspectives and the involvement of your organization and what our audience can do to participate in our current situation. The forced busing and now flying of asylum seekers by border states. They are now in need of welcome and care. Of course, you're welcome to address the ugly politics that drives this displacement. But maybe I would ask you to focus more in the interest of time on the politics of care that we now need to provide going forward and in welcoming and getting the support we need for these communities. So if maybe we can start with Carola this time and give the perspective of Neighbors Link, what what we can do together to welcome and support these asylum seekers.
Sure. Thank you, Howard. One of the first things I want to point out is that the fact that asylum seekers are coming to our community, to our country, should not be a surprise in the slightest. This we've known for a long time that there would be a significant growth in the number of foreign-born population in this country. We've known it for years. I could show you a few graphs that show that we're really expecting to double the number of foreign-born in this country in the by 2060. And so none of this should be a surprise, nor should it really be viewed as an emergency, but really more as a long-term trend that requires a solution and a plan that can be implemented over the long term. So I think one of the first things we can do is change that narrative away from a crisis, a surge, an emergency, and talk about the fact that we can plan for this, and we should have been planning for this for years, but it's never too late, and it's only going to continue. In fact, in New York City, they're expecting that by December, they'll see 75,000 to 100,000 people that are new asylum seekers in the area. And their estimates right now are in the somewhere between 11 to 15,000. So the first thing I'd say is we need to think about changing that narrative. Now, if we get down to the nuts and bolts about the needs, I'm going to sort of rattle them off real quickly. The most important thing is shelter. And the community-based organizations that are here on this call offer a whole variety of wraparound services. This is what we do all year long. We help people who have just come to this country. We help them with a whole variety of services. But what is the biggest challenge is shelter. And Durandi and I are working pretty closely with the county government and municipalities to talk to them about how they can help with the shelter. We could help with the wraparound services. So that's one of the key things. And along with that then comes food and clothing, which we also think, and I don't want to make it sound like it's easy, but with the tremendous people on this, listening today on this panel, the number of volunteers our organizations have, I think we can bring together food and clothing. The next thing that's going to be really important is immigration legal services. And we are already at capacity in the county. The people arriving to this area, and again, in the interest of time, but the people arriving to this area are extremely confused and have been confused intentionally by our authorities, so that it's very difficult for them to understand their rights as asylum seekers. So immigration legal services are going to be extremely important. And certainly medical services will also be important, and other wraparound services like school enrollment and things like that.
And Durandi, so you were referenced by Carola, so if you could pick up what, is CRC involved at the moment? Welcoming and caring for these new communities, or what is happening at CRC?
Absolutely, Howard. Thank you. And thank you to Carola. We are involved and we're working in coalition already with Alianza Laboral, with our county. As Carola mentioned, it is really important for us to really embrace this reality, right? And in Westchester County, where there is such concentrated affluence and willingness to support one another, especially with groups like this one. I think this is a real opportunity for us to welcome the community's members that we're seeing, and really empathize with them as they are in a confusing state. It will take months, if not up to a year or more, for these community members to fully, hopefully, realize working permits and an opportunity to, get out from under these government authorities. And so while we wait and help them wait, I think it's important for us to consider as a county, and not just as a county, but because I think that it's important for us to not rely solely on one city or one municipality or one county. This is really an opportunity for us to expand our coalition basis and foundation for working together, and invest in opportunities for welcome centers, respite centers, places where we can certainly connect to the community-based organizations that are already all over the county and beyond and statewide, to support these families with the critical services that they need, and certainly with the housing. And as Carola mentions, housing is most critical. We actually, and I'll give a little more context to what we're seeing on the ground. Nothing new, because we do see families all the time. But recently, 10 families have arrived after May, and they did come in from Texas and DC, were either flown in or bused in, and are making their way to Westchester County. Catholic Charities reported that people were walking all the way from the city to come to Westchester County. So we have currently at CRC 6 families from Guatemala, 4 from Peru, 3 from Colombia, 2 from Venezuela, and 1 from Nicaragua. And some of these, I think what's different and what we're seeing is the migrant families are either coming together as a household. They've lost all their belongings, so they're kind of showing up with only what they have on their backs and they don't know anyone. There's no family connection here. And they have different skill sets as well. So I think it's also an opportunity for us to say, well, given the pandemic, the high inflation and labor shortages that we're seeing across the country, why not welcome new people with different skill sets, and help get them acclimated. I know it'll take a long time for these work permits to come through, but it makes sense for communities to work together to provide housing services, food, clothing, everything that Carola mentioned, while we invest in the opportunity for us to support these labor shortages and support our economy, as we have done for many, many decades as a community.
Certainly.
Howard, if I could just say one thing. I mean, that was beautiful what Carola and Gerandi said. I just want to add that on all of these issues, there is also policy pressure needed in terms of the ceilings, and particularly in terms of work permits. These individuals are ready to work. They have their own documentation, and the United States government and the Labor Department could collaborate with New York City and get these people working permits quickly. And I have actually seen the texts to the mayor's staff from the construction unions, which in sometimes past have been like fearful of immigration, saying, where are these people? We need them. So
Yeah.
It's just, again, a question of changing policy and moving people.
Changing narrative and changing policy.
Yes.
I wanted to ask Yarissa to actually address this, to build on what everybody said. But, we are all, I guess we call ourselves NGOs, and we have limited resources and time and effort and a lot of volunteers. So is there, what do we need our audience, and what do we need from local advocacy? What do we need from local and state government to address the immediate need of, Ruth spoke to what we need from the national government, but what do we need now for Westchester County or the state of New York to come across with? What do we need to advocate for to care for these thousands of asylum seekers that are now with us?
Yeah. So just to even the response or the lack of response from our own governor about this whole issue is very telling too, right? Both Carola and Gerandi are talking about the need for more housing. And we have seen the debacle within just New York City alone of it was already at capacity before this new trend or more people started coming into the city. And it is a lot more visible now that more housing needs to be provided, right? just is very alarming to know that just a city of immigrants, doesn't have the right infrastructure to be able to provide support to these people that are coming in. And I think like what the rapid kind of like short-term solution will be to actually having more response from the governor around like either more funding for groups that are doing the work on the ground that many of us are already doing, and in our own little ways, also doing fundraising to continue to provide the resources that we know that we can do as an organizations to the people that are coming into our doors. So while we're still waiting for the federal government, right? Like, because they haven't really stepped up in doing anything whatsoever. We've been talking, like at the beginning of the conversation, it has been talking about just the history of like the immigration system within the United States and the lack of actual solutions. Like they did registry many, many years ago. Like there was a real possibility to do something through the reconciliation process. Nothing really came out of that. And like immigration keeps on being put in the back burner, but every time and time again, we're hit with the same thing where everybody's freaking out that, oh, there's like this new wave of migrants, but no one is actually tackling to the root of the question that the United States actually have to step up and create a permanent solution for immigration. We can talk about DACA. DACA was a short-term solution, right? It's a short-term solution, and it already has 10 years since it was announced. And so the people that the program is currently serving are well into their 30s, right? Like they're not young people anymore. High school students right now that are eligible to apply for the program, the same population that the program was kind of like designed to help are not able to benefit from the program at all. So it just begs this broader question, systematic question about when are we actually gonna talk about the root of the issue? Personally, I've been a Port Authority as I'm sure many of you have. And it's very alarming to see, like in a single day, you could see 4 or 5 coach buses arriving from Texas to New York City. A lot of those folks are being essentially forced to get to New York City because New York City is a pro-immigrant or a sanctuary city. A lot of those folks that are coming in have court dates or court appearances in another state coming up. And just to add into the whole madness of legal, not only representation, but also change of venue and how to even navigate that very complex system and the lack of information out there for people to know about what the consequences it is for them to actually miss their court date and what it could actually mean later, like down the line, is very alarming. And then the other thing, just to add quickly, is about just jobs, period, right? Like a lot of the people are coming in for them to actually be able to pay, get out of shelters, pay for an apartment. They actually need to have some sort of funding or source of income. So if we don't actually get put a structure together to be able to have more vocational classes out there for people to actually have access to them and for them to be able to find jobs, that will mean that they will be in the same systematic issue for a very long time until there's actually a breakthrough.
Well, I'm certain that everybody on this call, ourselves and the entire audience, know the need is great, and specifically in all these areas, jobs, housing, et cetera. Are there any particular campaigns now or advocacy efforts or petitions or lobbying the governor that are underway that we could all participate in a united front?
Howard, I could give you a couple there at the state level. One is the Access to Representation Act, which is legislation that's currently pending in our Senate to guarantee migrants some type of legal counsel during removal proceedings. So I think that would be one legislation. It's A 1961 for anybody that looks these up, and S 81A. So that would be one, Access to Representation Act. And so I'll stop there, but that would make a significant difference in the legal services needed. I will say number 2 is additional funding for legal services in the state budget. There is a formal campaign for an additional $10 million, and that comes through the Office for New Americans in the governor's office.
So there's a campaign. Sorry,
I was going to say that the other thing that also comes to mind It's about housing access voucher programs that is actually available and could be accessible for everyone in the state, regardless of their immigration status. And that could really help in terms of finding more long-term housing. You could also talk about coverage for all as it relates to healthcare as another option to also be included in the state budget that will actually also be accessible to all the residents of the state, regardless of their immigration status. Those are the other two that I will add at the state level.
And
And,
Howard, can I just
yep.
add one more thing locally? Because I think it's important for us to be realistic, and I'm not an idealist in thinking that, you know, while we put together a welcome center or a respite center, or, you know, figure out funding so that we can support these families while they transition into permanent housing, we need to take a serious look at our shelter system in Westchester County and advocate for changes that allow migrants to stay in a safe place. And, you know, I think that there's a lot of bureaucracy around our shelter systems, and it's only impeding our work to keep people safe and off of the streets when they come and just have nowhere to stay, and community-based organizations have limited funding to help pay for hotels and the like.
And I would encourage all of you to be in touch with us and our audience about any initiatives that are coming up to alleviate the situation. Even if we can't talk about solutions, I think we'd all like to be involved. And maybe I could ask Rebecca, this was a hyper local conversation, which is good because it's happening to us now. And I think we all need to understand the seriousness of the situation. I wish we could have heard that there were more initiatives and more things we can immediately get our county government and state government to do, but I'm sure that will evolve. Rebecca, moving away from that hyper-local situation, unless you have something to add there, what are the most important advocacy issues you're dealing with on the Mexican border? What's happening in the Biden administration, and any changes that are needed, changes that are not happening, and what we should be advocating with the administration?
Sure. Well, I'll pick up where that last conversation left off, because that's also a border, like this is also connected. This is a border related issue, which is that I think that the tendency, unfortunately, of our federal government is to say, in response to this moment, in response to lots of different moments of people, you know, larger numbers of people crossing the border, is to say, you know what we should do? We should make it harder for them to cross in the first place. And we should, you know, stop them in Mexico, stop them before they get to Mexico, stop them as soon as they cross and send them back, you know, never let them cross, something, you know, any policies like that. And that's been the story of the past, I don't know, many years, but certainly the story of this moment, where the biggest issue is, I would say by far, the existence of a policy called Title 42, which is a decades-old public health regulation that was put in place by the Trump administration as a response, theoretically, to coronavirus, saying, you know, basically closing the border to asylum seekers to prevent the spread of COVID, because they were coming from a country that had COVID. Every country had COVID. They were coming from a country that had COVID. And that's how that was used to justify a policy to keep people out. That policy is still in place, even though every other COVID restriction in our society has been lifted, even though you can cross the border if you are doing commerce, or if you're a tourist, or basically any other reason except being desperate to be able to, you know, find safety in another place. And that is just, it is an awful situation. It is causing a huge amount of devastation. It is causing a situation where people are put in the position to have to undertake these incredibly dangerous journeys and attempt difficult crossings that they wouldn't have had to do. They could have just approached at a port of entry because they have no other choice. It's causing a situation where people are trying to approach again and again. It is an entirely manufactured crisis that our government has caused by keeping Title 42 in place. And the human cost is unfathomable. I mean, the numbers that we are aware of that are documented of people who have been kidnapped, assaulted, even murdered in Mexico, not able to cross to the United States are in the tens of thousands. And that's just documented. I mean, we can assume that the numbers are way higher than that. And our staff in Mexico, I mean, they see hundreds and hundreds and thousands of people, all of whom are affected by Title 42. So right now, no asylum seekers can come into the United States unless they're from a handful of countries that are not affected by, Title 42. And that is the biggest issue that we're facing. In addition, there is the Remain in Mexico program, which theoretically the Supreme Court allowed that to be, taken apart and started, and to be removed. But we already have, court cases coming up with that being challenged again, and one of the worst policies of the Trump administration threatening to kind of come back on the scene. So we really do need a huge amount of advocacy here. And I think it was Ruth that mentioned earlier, this moment of when the US and the general public became aware of the family separations that were happening at the border. That was a kind of a rare moment of the general public paying attention to the border and caring about people, mothers, children, and seeing them as people and really speaking up. I would argue that moment back in 2018 and 2019, I would argue that the border is in a far worse, far desperate state even now than it was then. And we need to pay attention to that. And we need to be really speaking out about that and speaking out about the fact that there are changes happening in other parts of our immigration system, but not there, not at all.
Well, I want to thank all of you for tonight's contributions. Just a quick summary is my take away from this is encouraging all of us this should remain a major priority, a major policy priority, a major priority in our humanity to our global humanity and as far as human rights and it is related to our racial and economic justice work here in the US. It's related to gender equality. It's related to all of this important work by the people it impacts, and how we hopefully work in solidarity. And in the work we do for immigrants doesn't divide us from working people here in the U.S., but unites people together, as has been brought up by these panelists, as far as the construction workers, the opportunities to employ and welcome and make our country a better, stronger place. So thank you all for joining us, and thank you to our audience for joining us. And Holly, do you have a final word? Say goodnight.
I just thank all of our speakers. Your heart, your compassion was so inspiring. Speaking from the heart, speaking to our hearts. And we just thank you for everything that you do day in, day out on behalf of all immigrants. And Happy New Year to all. And keep doing this work, please. And thank you so much.
Excellent. Good night, everyone.
Thank you.
Happy
Good
New
night.
Year.
Night.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.